Hi, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Lisa Haller.
And I'm Jason Anderson. We're the programmers for the Shortcut section here at the Toronto International Film Festival. And we're very happy you're joining us for one of our two Q&A sessions with filmmakers from Shortcuts Program 4. And for starters, I'd love the filmmakers who are joining us to introduce themselves and say which film they're here to present.
Hi, my name is Remi. I'm a filmmaker from Lebanon, and the title of my film is Drought.
Hi, my name is Lev Lewis, and the title of my film is Every Day's Like This.
Hi, I'm Elinor from Tel Aviv, and my film is Our Hearts Beat Like War.
Hi, my name is Marie-Ève Juste, and my film is As Spring Comes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much all for being here today. We think your films are amazing and we know that they're going to make a huge impact on our audiences who have just watched them. So thank you so much for joining us. To start, we'd love to hear about how your film story began. Can you let us know what made you want to tell this particular story? Remi, we can start with you.
So a couple of years ago, my sister anticipated the catastrophic economical crisis that was going to happen, that is happening right now in Lebanon. So she was looking for houses to invest her savings in. And I accompanied her from one house to the other. And we saw like old houses with rusted pipes and new houses that had like some like soulless architecture in it. And this is where the idea came about these spaces and the kind of intimacy was when you spend time with them, what kind of like the kind of feeling you have and the intimacy you will towards them. And from here, I came up with the main plot of Drought about a middle-aged woman who's a real estate and how these like empty spaces mimic her dissatisfied life and her transactional relationship with her clients that also mimic her relationship with the lovers in her life. In a place like Lebanon, where patriarchal values really do not allow for genuine connections to happen between the men and the women.
Oh, thank you. I can go to Lev.
Go to me? Okay. Well, it's a bit funny because it's a very personal film, and I never really intended to make personal films. I mean, obviously personal in a broader sense, but not films about my life. And it was a sort of a coincidence because a few years ago, I had an idea for a film about this mother of a family who was on life support and the family dealing with that. And then very shortly after I started writing that, my own mother got sick with cancer. And then kind of years went by, my mother died, and I still had the money to make this short, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And just over time, it morphed into something that became completely about my own experience, to the point where I was like really kind of gritting my teeth, like, oh my God, am I doing this? My brother, who co-produced the film, obviously has so many of the same experiences as I do, and I would be showing him drafts of it, and he would be like, and there'd be something in it that was fictional. And then he'd be like, well, why not just put in the real thing? Because it's a better idea. And you'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess it is a better idea. But then it just became more and more about like every detail becoming part of my life. So that's sort of how it came about. And I still have some discomfort even with the whole concept of it. But yeah.
Thank you. And Elinor too.
I came to write this the script and to do this film. Actually, I wanted to portray the moment, if you can call it a moment, where a young person, a young soul, is having this awakening or becoming social aware and open his mind and his heart to different ideas and sees and hears stories that is going to affect his approach to life and to humanity and about being a human being and So I wanted to really portray this moment where a child hears something that is going to affect and to shape his world, his inner world, and his sensibility towards other people. And it connected very well with the testimonies that came to me from refugees that are in Israel, from Sudan and Eritrea, and it was also I started writing it after in the mid of the refugee crisis that was happening in Europe. So everything, like all dots connected to this 15 minutes of thing called film.
Great, thanks so much. And Marie-Ève for As Spring Comes too.
Yes, actually, the film is adapted from a play. So the writer of the play, she came to me, I think it was in 2014, and asked me if I would be interested to turn it into a film. And the play was more about death. Actually, it was about the suicide of the lady that just wanted to collapse in this house. But I didn't want to do a film about suicide. I find it, for different reasons, really tricky and difficult. So I decided to turn death into life. So that was the moment where I imagined that she could have a really strange disease. It could be a metaphor for depression, but I don't like this idea of like, I was more interested in opposite, like trying to deal with the cold and the heat, or the life and the death, and all this happening in a really isolated place. So that's where the idea came back in 2014, to change death into life and to change the idea of the suicide into a big blossom of flowers. And yes, that's it.
Beautiful. I mean, I just think that, I mean, Lisa and I both love your films, and they're also powerful and also different and original. And I think they all do things that are surprising to us, especially. And I mean, one thing just to talk more to Elinor and Marie-Ève right now is just about that really amazing balance of kind of naturalistic elements and dream and fantasy and surrealism. Just to, I mean, because again, those it's very hard to get that kind of balance, and yet I think both films do it so beautifully. And maybe Elinor can sort of speak to that kind of as the shifting between those modes in her film.
Yeah, it was it was a sort of a journey to realize how to make this shift happen. Yeah, so the film does start in a very realistic, very straightforward story, you can say, and then makes this huge turn to a world of surreal fantasy, and it also changes the film language changes, also the material changes. We started filming the realistic part of the film in HD, in digital camera, in Alexa, and then we changed in the fantasy part of the film to 16 millimeters. We shot it on a Bolex camera using a hand crank technique, which is using this thing to fix to control manually on the frame rate of the film. It was a very funny and a lot of tests happening before, and trying to realize how to exactly manage that. But once you connected these two parts of the film, it was, I mean, yeah, it worked, and it was beautiful, and yeah, that's what I have to say about it now.
Great, thank you.
this moment. Maybe things will come to mind.
It's and the same. I think the same for Marie-Ève, where you do kind of have this sort of shift from maybe a mode that you sort of expect from a film, and then you get deeper and deeper into this completely other sort of mode and space.
Yes, totally. For me, it was the first time that I did a more fantastic film. I'm used to do really more realistic film, but I think a little bit like Elinor mentioned is I wanted to have the feeling that you can have when like loves happen to you, like slowly like the reality change, and there's this change that is into the main character. He doesn't really know what is happening to him, and for the lady as well, the same thing is happening, but for me it was really in his eye that each time that he goes back to this little cabin, the things change, and it's something that is totally overwhelming him, and he doesn't really understand what is happening, since in my imagination this man is really more someone used to more concrete and like concrete things. And so this is really the sense that I wanted to transmit to the film, that the reality slowly is shifting. And at the beginning, there's like the little ants, for example. So you have like little signs that things are not going as you were expecting them to go in a cabin in the winter. And at the end, it's totally overwhelming, the film and the characters.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And for Lev, your film, you transport the viewer into this house. You feel like you are in the room, you are experiencing this ongoing planning and grief as the characters are doing that. Are you able to let us know a little bit more about the challenge in achieving something with very incidental dialogue and building a story where people aren't really speaking about the elephant in the room, but it's very much evident that there's this heaviness and weight to the story and to their lives. And maybe if you're comfortable talking about how you were able to relate that experience to the characters that are playing the characters in the film, the cast members.
Yeah, I mean, from a practical standpoint, the hardest aspect of it was actually getting across that there's this medically assisted death that's going to happen without people ever saying that, because they wouldn't, because we're just dropped in the midst of people that have talked about it a million times already. That's been a challenge with a lot of films that I've been a part of recently. It's easier to start something when characters learn it, but sometimes it's more interesting to come in after they've learned it. But then you don't want to have really cheesy exposition where it sounds totally false. And obviously, the key with a movie like this is that it feels lived in, and the characters feel like they've done this all before to some extent. So that was really difficult, and I'm not sure it's fully been achieved. I hope that people understand it. It's always a question I sort of have for people who don't know the subject matter beforehand. Like, did you get that? Because as much as I want it to feel like you're in a time and a place and all these sort of atmospheric things, I also just want you to have some comprehension of what they're dealing with. So practically from a writing standpoint, that was difficult. In terms of working with the actors on it, I mean, it was the best experience of working with actors that I've had, because there was no guessing at motivation. There was no guessing at what would somebody do. If they came to me with a question about something, I didn't have to have some imagined character in my head who I'd be like, oh, they could do this, they could do that. I knew what you would do. And I think if there's any authenticity, or that's a loaded word, but you know, if it feels that way, and if the film comes off like that, I think it's because there is that lived experience that just, no one was doing anything that was false, really. So that was really nice. I mean, again, I have this sort of sensitivity to like, talking about myself and relaying these experiences. So working with the actors in that front, it was kind of having to get past like, okay, we're just going to be talking about things that happened in my life. And it's not even the sensitivity around those events per se. It's just more the kind of like, I don't like to feel like I'm giving this impression that I only care about things that happen to me. And so kind of getting past myself on that and just accepting that this was what the film was and I had to go into those places. That was really important. And I think once that happened, everyone kind of let down their guard a little bit. And the performers especially, I think, were just kind of interested in inhabiting this space. And we had one day of rehearsal before we actually shot it. And we spent part of that rehearsal just talking about sort of general ideas about it. And some of the other actors had some experiences that they could relay this to and such. But most of it was just also just kind of going through the motions. And another aspect of it that was difficult was that because it's meant to be this lived thing that everyone should feel natural as their environment, everyone always had to have something to do, and they always had to know where to go, and they always had to know their space. And that combined with having to do the dialogue, having to do things quickly, having to know my setups, you know, it was a real, like, it was a balancing act to make sure that we were getting across the dialogue and the story beats, and also making sure that they knew which cabinet to go to. And so the blocking became really important. And I was just kind of blown away actually by the actors that I got and how seamlessly they could integrate those things. And I mean, I honestly, I relied on them so much to figure that stuff out, because it was really a kind of hard task to combine all those elements.
Well, I think you can be very confident in the fact that you created this space. There's no doubt about it. Everyone was right there with your characters. And I think we want to thank you for bringing your bravery to the film, because I think that lived in experience and that, you know, those heartfelt moments and that difficulties that the characters go through, I think is, yeah, something that happened to you and your family personally, but I think there's so much that people can relate to that. I think it can be a very personal story for a lot of people, and it can touch home for a lot of people, maybe especially now during a particularly tough time. But yeah, I think you did an absolutely beautiful job. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's essential.
Well, thanks, Lisa. I mean, I'm glad that it came off that way. So great, thank you.
I was just thinking about that. I mean, certainly something that connects these films is just ideas about what kind of goes spoken or unspoken. And I'd love to hear from Remi about Drought, because you really had this extraordinary performance, and maybe you can talk about finding your lead performer as well. But I mean, there's just, again, so much that she does wordlessly in the film, and so much that she conveys, and this whole kind of sensuality she has, and the relationship to her space, that again is not stuff that is addressed verbally in any kind of conventional way. I think is so strong.
I think I've always been interested since the past 2 projects I've been working on about how to portray women's isolation, but through the aesthetics of like reflecting their inner worlds. And that's why dialogue I was more focusing on a dialogue to feel more like a monologue. So even when she's talking to her clients, we never hear the other side. And the idea of merging these people where we don't know, even when she meets this man who's a lover or something like that, you really don't know if he's a client or not. And these 2 spaces to merge together. So in order for this abstraction to occur, there should be much less information about this dialogue being like informational at any point. And at some point, I didn't feel there was any, after midway through the film, I felt there is no need for any kind of dialogue anymore. Because in a way, I hoped and I attempted to feel like we have submerged so much into her internal world that she's not connecting with anyone anymore. In terms of the performance, actually, how I worked with the actress, it's very hard to begin with, because I know I had some like nudity scenes in the film. It was like, it's hard to find actors middle-aged, I would say, that would accept to do these things. So it was a lot of rehearsals with the actress to just make her feel good about, you know, like being topless in front of the camera and all of this. And there were usually my take ratios. I usually go for 4 takes maximum because I do a lot of rehearsals with actors, especially with the way like their body moves and like the blocking and all of these things. So with this film, we would go for like 18, 19 takes because any kind of an over performance will actually, because also the film is over stylized. So I was trying to subdue the performance as much so that I can like, you know, focus more on the like the aesthetic and the world around her that reflects her internal reality. The actress lives in Canada. She's Canadian as well. She's Lebanese Canadian. So it was also her first, like her 4th film. She's doing it in Lebanon. And she has always been used to working in series and like commercials. So she found it at the beginning a bit challenging, but then when she broke through, I was actually very impressed by her performance.
Oh, us too. I mean, she's so extraordinary, and she just has that presence. I mean, you can't stop watching her, and it really is. And again, that's an interesting balance between a sort of stylized emphasis on kind of the space and the visual, but also this kind of subdued, quiet intensity of the sort of human presence and performance in the middle of it. I think, and again, something I think I feel in many of the films here today. And I guess sort of a springboard to that, just sort of, I mean, just because I think it connects to the films, is this extraordinary use of space. Like you really are, you know, kind of in these, I mean, places that maybe seem like, you know, in an empty apartment, I'd seem mundane, but it's kind of transformed. And maybe just maybe starting with Marie-Ève, just talking about this extraordinary set design that you've kind of, I mean, this place that you've created for the film, and I just to talk about how that evolved and how you kind of use that to tell the story that you wanted to tell.
Yes, actually, this was kind of the biggest challenge of the film in terms of art craft and in terms of challenge, because I really wanted, I wanted the actor to be really comfortable to live into this cabin as if it was real. Of course, it was shot in the studio, and this was a new thing for me as well, shooting in a studio, because I'm used really to I really like scouting location, and I'm always really searching for reality. So this is like reality was ours. So we have really to construct like each little detail, like the cabin was constructed, and yes, and I really wanted this space to be a little hub, a little bubble for the actors to just live in it, and for them not to do too many movements, just to live in this space. And as I said before, since the idea of the film was to construct it on the opposite, I really wanted a tiny place, really comfortable, really hot, really like with some kind of sensuality, to make an opposition with the outdoor, which is really harsh, really windy. And when we shot it, actually there was a real blizzard. It was shot in Saguenay, which is up north in Quebec, not at the north, but like, yes, so it was like really windy. It was like 75 kilometers wind. So this was a challenge as well, but I think it really helped to create the film. I mean, we didn't have to do nothing. This was just the reality of the place, and yes, and the people there were so generous, like just to indicate us where to shoot and like to lend us a cabin. So so this really helped. But I think the whole film is really, I really have to pay a big contribution to the art designer Sylvie Desmarais, which really like did everything with so much love and passion with all her team, and as well to a good friend of mine, Frédéric Allard, that crafted all and chose all the flowers. There's some real and there's some false. It was really a big work, because I didn't want that. For me, it was not so important that the flowers and all the design look real. I accepted that everyone knew it would be false, and everyone knew it was constructed. And even in the lighting, there's something artificial, like, and it's really assumed, like the studio lighting, but I just wanted something coherent. This was the more important thing for me in terms of art craft. So.
Great, thank you. I mean, it is really such an amazing balance and just such an unusual and affecting visual presentation of the film. And I guess I'm maybe go to Elinor next, talking about, I mean, again, it's sort of like that sort of split between kind of maybe a more familiar environments, but also that'll shift to something very heightened and strange. I mean, quite and it's such a great shift between those sorts of things, and the use of space of the film is so distinct.
I'm not sure I get the question, but
I'm not sure if there was a question. I'm open to
okay.
change again.
I will try to take it. Okay. Yeah. So, in order to shift between the worlds, I kind of the script suggested that this is a dream. And it's a very it's a moment I really like in the film, when he just, you know, he hears, the boy in the film hears this very cruel story, and it kind of sends him to sleep in a very weird way. I mean, he cannot. I think there is something that it's so difficult that you just fall asleep. And in this sleep, there is his mother's voice that that brings him that leads him to this new world and stays as a voiceover. So his mother is like this familiar voice that takes him to this really unknown territory, where he becomes where he puts himself in the body of a refugee child, and kind of in a way that maybe children do, identifies so much with the character that he becomes this thing himself. And then we wanted to, I really wanted to opposite these two worlds. So it was very important for us. Do you hear me well? Okay, so it was very important for us to kind of create this very how do I say, very unrealistic. So everything is this kind of theaterization. Everything is not. I mean, it's not fine. We were trying to get this kind of realistic set, but in the opposite, we made everything from scratch, and created this kind of very different space for him to dream and to imagine this family, and to dive into this even deeper sleep. It was a sleep inside a sleep. So yeah, so you really become, you really reach this kind of different levels of awareness through going deeper into sleep. So it's kind of opposite on opposite, and it was a very fun and creative world to create with alongside my cinematographer and the artistic designer. It was you know, just to get into this part of the dream where he in this sea in the sea, in a glass box, where so we were trying a lot of, we were testing a lot of options. We even tested options to kind of plant him in this huge aquarium that we found, that you know, to do it more realistic. We thought maybe for this moment to shine in the film and to be very strong, we would go all the way with this like huge aquarium and you know, and and use special effects and stuff. But in the end, we always came back to this kind of handcraft, kind of to create it very manually, and it was it's I mean, I think it's in the end it's where the heart of the film is, kind of playful, very childish kind of setups. That I really like the result.
Yeah, it's lovely, and it's so, I mean, certainly obviously so much creativity poured into it, and it's interesting because again it's sort of an interesting contrast with kind of the spaces in Drought and every days like this, where you have kind of these, you know, at one hand might be familiar spaces, but they too are sort of transformed somehow in the film and become defamiliarized or even alien, or just there's a something about those spaces. And I guess just to talk to Remi about finding these apartments and kind of why, and also the street scenes too are very important, but also kind of why you were drawn to the places you were for this film.
The thing is, when I wrote the script and even when I was location scouting, I had three styles of thing. One is an old apartment, which is the first apartments you visit, because I wanted this kind of like a space with history, that even if it's empty, it still has this kind of character in it, but also it's old. And this is where she kind of feels this longing, because herself is aging. And that's why when she's on the bed by herself and looking at her reflection, it's kind of also reflecting the whole history of this house by itself. In the new apartment, I wanted to more make it, that's why you have all these like papers and plastic, because I wanted to have it, because it's new and it's soulless, I wanted to have the feeling of like a morgue, like as if it's in a morgue. And that's why it's like detached completely from any kind of feeling. The third apartment, which we only see in the end, I wanted it to like round it to like this woman doesn't even belong to these spaces, neither to this class, and she is just there performing until she comes back home to her like what looks like a home, a small humble middle class house. So these were like the three routes I was taking in order to reflect a bit about also the architecture of Beirut itself. And as for the street, I just wanted a place where like, of course, a place that looks like where people from like the working class would go there and have a bite. It's just like her, also it's like a transition to her going back to her place. It's like her neighborhood, her stuff where she can have like a break. But also I wanted to kind of transition it into this space that feels like it's not real when she passes through this corridor and this exchange of thing. Because also I wanted to kind of switch with like, to play with gender roles, because she is the one who is hunting him down as opposed to him being the one who is following her. So yeah, these were the things that I was working on and experimenting with.
You know, again, it sort of works so there is so many interesting dynamics and relationships between these spaces and the people who are in them. And I guess, and just to finish with Lev on the same token, by the same token, just because it is, I mean, this is very much a sort of, looks like a middle-class Toronto home, and you sort of have these sort of immediately sort of maybe warm associations, but it isn't. It's the way the way they are kind of, I mean, all the characters are occasionally together, but also quite separate in the space, and as an interesting sort of emotional quality that this place takes on because of what's going on there. And I guess if you could talk further about kind of using that home, this space, to sort of, I mean, tell the story as well.
Yeah, I mean, the space itself, it stays very consistent. My cinematographer and I had the idea when we first started that sort of every scene, and it's continuous, so scene is kind of relative here, but every kind of passing time you basically go from the upstairs to the downstairs, you get a little bit dimmer. I think we ended up doing that in color a little bit, but it's extremely subtle. The last shot is darker than the first, but I think more the characters change the relationship to the space than the actual space itself changes. As you said, it's kind of about people coming and going and a lot of movement in a kind of very quiet way. So you kind of start out with everyone separate, they come together for this brief conversation, and then they all go their separate ways again in a semi-circuitous way. But I think that changes things more, because when you have the father at the end pouring coffee, that kitchen feels quite big, but when they're all cramped in it together, it feels much smaller and more constricted. It wasn't really something I thought about too much. I think that the structure of the story and the natural, what would these people do, or what did my family literally do, that really was more of how that came to be than it was actually thinking about, will this space change in any particular way? The only idea I had about a shifting space was this idea of dimness. And that was also practical too, because the film takes place, well, we had a lot of practical considerations about when would the film actually take place, because as any filmmaker here knows, if you're trying to shoot, you know, what actually takes place over 10 minutes and you're doing it over multiple days, it's very difficult to have consistent light. So the easiest thing that it ended up being was getting a little bit of sort of magic hour end of dusk, and then most of it plays out just during night, because then we could black out windows and we could do all this sort of stuff, when the perfect iteration of this would have been actually it all takes place over kind of 5 to 6 p.m. when the light's just dimming. So we had to kind of figure out how to achieve all that, and you can see a little bit of light in the sky at the start, and then by the end there's less so, although you can see some when there's the wide shot of the father sitting there, but that's more just because we're shooting on like HD cameras where it just picks up so much information. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of considerations, and I think a lot of them are practical, you know. I mean, it wasn't like with any low budget film, you just have to take into account your limitations and what you can achieve and what you have access to. That house is a friend of my family's. I've known it for a long time. It's kind of weird too. You kind of mixed up like this friend of my family's with my own life, and then also you're bringing in actors who had nothing to do with this. So it's a whole weird thing when all the stuff gets blended together. But it worked out nicely, and it was extremely cramped, of course. I would like to shoot in a studio one day, but no. So you know, your shots are limited by that. Everything's limited by that. But I think what it brought to it was that it came with so much already packed in. It's a very nice house, and they have so much stuff in it. And when you have a low budget film and you're starting a space from scratch, your production designer has to go out and buy a million things, which they just can't afford to do. So that was a real benefit to it. We just went into the space, and our production designer was like, oh, all I have to do is tweak a few things, you know, take down a couple of bits of artwork we don't like, move some things around. But practically speaking, it was just there, and it was able for us just to move in and tweak. So that was a big benefit for, you know, the limitations that we had as a production.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. Sadly, that's all the time we have for this session today, but we want to thank all the filmmakers for being here today and speaking to your films, and thank you so much for joining us. All right, that's all for us.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Great to meet you guys.
Great to meet you.